Okay, let me take you back thousands of years to the ancient kingdom of Ithaca, because today I am going to completely break down the brutal 20-year epic of a missing king. We're talking about a story of raw survival, of unmatched tactical genius, and honestly, of just unrelenting stubborn willpower. I'm taking you deep into the ancient Greek masterpiece written by Homer known as the Odyssey. Now, this is a narrative that is so deeply ingrained in our storytelling DNA that it has practically set the gold standard for what makes a story truly legendary. It's incredibly ripe for cinematic adaptation. In fact, Christopher Nolan is bringing this exact epic to the big screen. And to truly appreciate what's coming our way, we really need to understand the magnificent, terrifying scale of this journey. So settle in, because I'm going to take you step by step through every single terrifying monster, every crushing betrayal, and every tactical masterstroke of the greatest survival story ever told.
So, part 1, the empty throne. Let's look at an Ithaca that is completely leaderless. Let's dive right into the heart of the crisis to understand the stakes here. Imagine a kingdom left completely abandoned and leaderless for 2 straight decades. You see, after spending 10 years fighting the absolute meat grinder that was the Trojan War, the brilliant tactician and king of Ithaca, Odysseus, simply vanished. Gone. While other Greek kings eventually trickled back home, Ithaca was left to rot from within. Rumors are swirling everywhere that the great king is dead in the water, and in his absence, a massive, dangerous power vacuum opens up. And that vacuum brings us to this staggering number, 100. Over 100 ruthless, aristocratic suitors have essentially invaded Odysseus' palace. Think about that for a second. Because the king has been missing for 10 years after the war ended, these men have just moved in. They are eating his food. They are drinking his wine, they're draining his royal wealth, and most devastatingly, they are aggressively plotting to steal his entire kingdom. And their main strategy? They are trying to force Odysseus' grieving wife, Queen Penelope, into a new marriage so one of them can officially claim the throne. It is a deeply tense, suffocating environment. The rightful royal family is essentially being held hostage in their own home. Which leads us to part 2, a son's desperate quest to find answers. This suffocating, hostile environment finally forces his son, Telemachus, into action. And really think about the tragedy of Telemachus here. He was just a literal baby when his father left for Troy. He has grown up entirely in the massive shadow of a legendary father he has never even met. And he has to sit there and watch these arrogant suitors utterly disrespect his mother and squander his inheritance. He realizes pretty quickly that if he just sits around, these men are going to consume everything and take the kingdom by force. Driven by this desperate need for the truth, he sets sail. But he isn't entirely alone in this. He's actually secretly guided by the goddess of wisdom, Athena. She heavily favors Odysseus and his bloodline, so she disguises herself as a human to physically push Telemachus to take action. Under her subtle guidance, he travels to speak with surviving veterans of the Trojan War. And eventually, he sits down with King Menelaus of Sparta, the very man whose wife Helen sparked the entire war to begin with. And Menelaus drops a massive bombshell. Odysseus did not die in battle. He wasn't lost at Troy. Against all odds, the great king of Ithaca is actually still alive.
So, naturally, you're wondering, where exactly has the great king been hiding all this time? Let me explain his situation, because it's bleak. He is trapped on the isolated, mystical island of Ogygia. He has been marooned there for 7 agonizing years, held captive by a wildly powerful goddess named Calypso. Calypso has fallen deeply, obsessively in love with him, and she is desperately trying to bribe him with the ultimate gift. She is offering him immortality. She promises him endless luxury, eternal youth, if he just agrees to stay with her forever. But Odysseus refuses. Literally every single day, he sits on the shore, staring out at the ocean and weeping. He consciously chooses the painful mortal reality of his aging wife, his son, and his rocky homeland over becoming an immortal god. But knowing he's on this island raises a massive, haunting question. Honestly, it's the central mystery of this entire epic. How does a brilliant, world-renowned tactician, a guy who sailed away from the smoking ruins of Troy with a fleet of 12 ships and a victorious, battle-hardened army, end up entirely alone? How does he wash up on a magical island without a single soldier left alive? What absolute nightmare did he endure out there on the open seas to lose absolutely everything? Well, that brings us to part 3, the Odyssey of Monsters, his 10-year nightmare. To understand the immense scale of this tragedy, we have to dive into the terrifying flashback that Odysseus recounts to the Phaeacians. You see, after Zeus finally steps in and commands Calypso to let Odysseus build a raft and go, the sea god Poseidon, who absolutely hates him, shatters that raft with a violent storm. Exhausted, half-drowned, and near death,
Odysseus washes up on the shores of the Phaeacians. There, he finally drops his guard, reveals his true identity, and begins to tell them the harrowing, bloody backstory of his 10-year voyage through hell. And his path of ruin starts literally the moment they leave Troy. First, they stop at Ismarus for a raid, which gets terribly, horribly botched. It results in the brutal deaths of 72 of his men right off the bat. Then, the surviving ships are blown wildly off course to the land of the Lotus Eaters. The locals there feed his crew a magical lotus flower that acts as a mind-wiping narcotic. It utterly erases their memories of home and any desire to ever return. Odysseus literally has to violently drag his weeping, addicted men back to the ships and tie them to the benches just to escape. From there, his 12 ships make landfall on a completely uncharted, treacherous island, the island of the Cyclopes.
Let me paint a picture of the sheer claustrophobic horror of this specific moment. Exploring the island, Odysseus and 12 of his absolute best men wander into an enormous cave, hoping the owner might offer them hospitality and supplies. Instead, the owner comes home, and it is a colossal one-eyed giant named Polyphemus. The monster casually rolls an immovable boulder over the entrance, a stone so incredibly heavy that 20 wagons couldn't budge it. Trapped inside this pitch-black cave, Odysseus watches completely helplessly as the giant reaches down, snatches up 2 of his men, smashes their heads against the stone floor like ragdolls, and eats them completely raw. And the giant promises to do this every single day until they are all gone.
This situation brilliantly illustrates why Odysseus is famous for his mind, not just his skill with a sword. He realizes immediately that if he just sneaks up and kills the giant in his sleep, they will be forever trapped behind that giant boulder and they'll starve to death. So he uses his legendary cunning. He manages to get the giant unbelievably drunk on some highly concentrated wine they brought. When the slurring monster asks for his name, Odysseus looks at him and replies, "My name is No Man." Once the giant finally passes out, Odysseus and his surviving men take a massive, sharpened wooden staff, heat it in the fire, and plunge it into the monster's single eye, blinding him. The Cyclops wakes up screaming in absolute agony, calling out to his giant neighbors for help. But he's yelling, "No man is killing me, no man is hurting me." So his neighbors just think it's a disease sent by the gods and they completely ignore him. The next morning, Odysseus pulls off a brilliant escape by tying his remaining men underneath the bellies of the giant's enormous sheep. When the blind giant lets the flock out to graze, feeling only their woolly backs, the men slip right out. They make it back to the ship, they push off the shore, and they are finally free. But right here is where we see the fatal flaw of our hero, his pride, his hubris. As they are actively sailing away to safety, Odysseus makes a massive, arrogant mistake. He desperately wants this monster to know exactly who bested him. He can't help himself. So he shouts his real name and his royal title back to the bleeding, blinded beast on the shore. "I am Odysseus, king of Ithaca." Now, the crucial point here is that by revealing his actual identity, he gives the Cyclops the exact ammunition he needs to exact revenge. Polyphemus prays directly to his father, who happens to be the sea god Poseidon, begging him to utterly destroy the king's journey. He curses him to arrive home late, completely broken, with all his comrades dead, and to find absolutely nothing but suffering waiting for him in Ithaca. And let me tell you, this curse hits with absolute terrifying devastation. It sparks a violent downward spiral. Shortly after escaping the Cyclops, they actually catch a break. They are given a magical bag containing all the wild winds of the ocean, specifically meant to guarantee them a safe, smooth journey home. And it works. They get so incredibly close to Ithaca that they can literally see the shores. They can see the campfires. But while Odysseus, exhausted from staying awake for days, finally closes his eyes to sleep, his incredibly greedy crew gets suspicious. They're convinced the bag is actually full of secret gold that he's hoarding, so they tear it open. The unleashed hurricane blows them entirely off course, right back out into the endless ocean. Soon after that devastating setback, they land on the island of the Laestrygonians. These aren't just giants, they are a terrifying race of giant cannibals. The giants stand on the cliffs and hurl massive boulders down at the fleet trapped in the harbor. In one incredibly bloody fell swoop, 11 of Odysseus' 12 ships are shattered into splinters, and those crews are eaten alive. Out of the entire armada, only Odysseus' single ship barely manages to row away. Which brings us to part 4, Descent into the Underworld, Seeking Answers from the Dead. Down to just a single surviving ship and a deeply traumatized crew, they desperately seek refuge on the island of the sorceress Circe. Initially, this is just another absolute nightmare. Circe uses dark magic to literally turn a scouting party of his men into actual farm animals, pigs to be exact. After Odysseus, with some divine help, forces her to turn them back, They actually end up staying there for a whole year, just recuperating. But when they are finally ready to brave the seas again, Circe gives them a terrifying directive. She says, if you ever want to find your way back to Ithaca, you can't just sail there. You must first seek navigational guidance from the dead. So let's move to the chilling, shadowy realm of the underworld. This is where the psychological weight of the story really bears down. Odysseus performs ancient blood sacrifices to summon the spirits because the dead are drawn to the blood. Eventually, he summons the blind, dead prophet Tiresias, and Tiresias delivers a grave life or death warning. He tells Odysseus the path ahead is perilous, but there is one absolute unbreakable rule. When you reach the island of the sun god, you will see his sacred cattle roaming around. Whatever you do, do not harm, touch, or eat the sacred cattle. If you do, utter destruction will fall upon your ship and every single man on your crew. But honestly, it is the other ghost he meets down there that truly shake him to his core. He speaks to his own mother. He didn't even know she was dead. She reveals she died of a broken heart, endlessly waiting for him to return. He meets the legendary warrior Achilles, who tells him that being a king of the dead is miserable, and he'd rather be a living slave to a poor dirt farmer than rule over all these ghosts. But most chillingly, he speaks to King Agamemnon, the supreme commander of the entire Greek army at Troy. Agamemnon actually successfully made it home after the war, only to be brutally, violently murdered by his own wife and her new lover the night he arrived. Agamemnon looks dead at Odysseus and darkly warns him, "Trust no one, not even your wife. Test her loyalty before you ever reveal yourself." That warning burrows deep into Odysseus's mind.
Now for part 5, the wrath of gods, the final fatal sea journey. Armed with these heavy prophecies, actively mourning his mother, and now deeply, deeply paranoid about what might be waiting for him at home, Odysseus embarks on his final leg. And the ocean itself seems specifically designed to break his spirit. They're almost immediately forced into an impossible, agonizing leadership choice. They have to navigate a narrow ocean strait flanked by 2 supernatural horrors. On one side is Charybdis, a massive churning whirlpool that will suck the entire ship down to the bottom of the sea and annihilate everyone. On the other side, perched on a cliff, is Scylla, a terrifying monster with 6 long necks and ravenous heads. Odysseus knows he cannot fight them. To avoid losing the entire ship to the whirlpool, he has to deliberately steer closer to the monster. He has to consciously make the choice to sacrifice exactly 6 of his best screaming men, snatched right off the deck by Scylla's heads, just so the rest of the ship can survive. It is a brutal, haunting moment of calculated loss that tears him apart. But the true doom of his men, the absolute fulfillment of the Cyclops' curse, comes shortly after that. They land on the island of the sun god, and for an entire month, they are trapped there by fierce, unyielding winds. Their supplies completely run out. Driven absolutely mad by starvation, the crew decides they would rather face a quick death by the wrath of the gods than die slowly, day by day, of hunger. So while Odysseus walks inland to pray for salvation and accidentally falls asleep, the crew commits the ultimate betrayal. They disobey their king's strict, life-saving orders, they round up the sun god's sacred cattle, and they slaughter them. And the punishment for this is swift and absolute. As soon as the winds die down and they set sail again, the sun god demands immediate vengeance from Zeus. In furious retaliation, Zeus hurls a gigantic, blinding lightning bolt straight down from the heavens, utterly obliterating that last ship. The vessel is blown into a million splinters. Every single crew member drowns in the boiling, storm-tossed sea. Only Odysseus manages to survive, desperately clinging to a piece of floating wreckage. He drifts alone in the vast open ocean for days upon days until he washes up on Calypso's island. And just like that, our timeline perfectly syncs back up to exactly where this epic began. He is trapped there for 7 years, entirely alone, the sole tragic survivor of a doomed fleet. Which finally brings us to part 6, the king's bloody return to Ithaca. With his tragic 10-year backstory finally completely out on the table, the Phaeacian king is just deeply moved by the tale. He loads Odysseus down with immense treasure and gifts him a fast magical ship with a fresh crew. Overnight, while he sleeps, they sail him back and drop him on the foggy shores of Ithaca. After 20 long years, the king has finally returned to his homeland. But he remembers Agamemnon's dark warning from the underworld, and he knows his own palace is heavily infested with 100 armed, extremely hostile suitors. He literally cannot just walk in the front door. So Athena steps in again. She magically disguises the mighty warrior as a frail, pathetic, bald old beggar in rags.
Reunited in absolute secrecy with his now grown son Telemachus and his fiercely loyal swineherd Eumaeus, they begin to meticulously plan their revenge. Disguised as this beggar, Odysseus infiltrates his own palace to personally test the loyalty of his household, and the suitors treat him abhorrently, especially their arrogant ringleader Antinous, who violently abuses him and even throws a heavy footstool at his back. Odysseus just absorbs the humiliation, watching, waiting, and calculating. Meanwhile, Penelope, pushed to her absolute breaking point and totally unaware her husband is in the room disguised as a beggar, announces a final, impossible challenge to the suitors. She declares she will marry the man who can successfully string Odysseus's legendary, incredibly stiff hunting bow and shoot a single arrow cleanly through the rings of 12 axe heads lined up in a row. I really want to emphasize the incredible, explosive, cinematic satisfaction of this climax. It's legendary. One by one, the arrogant suitors step up to try and string this stiff bow, and one by one, they completely fail. They just lack the sheer physical strength and technique. Then, the frail old beggar asks for a turn. The suitors burst into laughter, mocking him, but Odysseus takes the heavy bow in his hands. In one fluid, utterly effortless motion, he bends the wood and strings the weapon. The entire hall goes dead silent. He notches an arrow and shoots it flawlessly through all 12 axe rings. Then, without missing a single beat, he drops the beggar disguise, turns the bow on the stunned crowd, and immediately puts his very next arrow straight through the neck of the lead suitor, Antinous. Telemachus bars the door shut. Side by side with his son, Odysseus unleashes 20 years of pent-up rage, wiping out every single suitor in the hall in a brilliantly tactical, bloody, and merciless slaughter to finally reclaim his throne. This intense, brilliant narrative structure, the deep tragedy, the terrifying monsters, the tactical espionage of the beggar disguise, and that explosive, bloody climax. This is exactly why the upcoming film adaptation of the Odyssey is so incredibly highly anticipated by movie lovers everywhere. A master director like Christopher Nolan thrives on exactly these elements: complex, interwoven timelines, sky-high stakes, and deeply flawed protagonists pushed to the absolute edge of human endurance. We are already seeing hints of a deeply grounded, modern cinematic vision for this. There are glimpses of modern, relatable language seamlessly blended into the ancient setting, like Telemachus simply referring to his mythical father as Dad, which really grounds the human emotion. And it raises some truly fascinating possibilities for the screen. Will literal gods like Poseidon be depicted not as giant men holding tridents, but as terrifying, naturally occurring, unstoppable ocean storms? By stripping away the magical, fairy tale fantasy and intensely focusing on the raw, gritty reality of survival and the heavy psychological toll of war, it leaves us asking a big question. How will a modern cinematic genius completely reinvent the greatest survival story ever told? Will making the myth feel utterly real, completely visceral, actually make it even more terrifying? Honestly, that is something I absolutely cannot wait to see unfold.